Past the hills and rivers wide, where wildflowers freely bloom. In this land with skies so open, where can our children play? In cities bustling, bright and loud, cars and lights that never sleep, do they find a piece of sky? Where can our children play? Bring them fields of green and gold, let their laughter echo clear. In a world so tightly wound, where can our children play? Mountains whisper ancient tales, forests sing in harmony. Will these wonders slip away? Where can our children play? Beyond the screens and towers tall, where dreams once were born and bred, do they carve new paths of joy? Where can our children play? Let's be stewards of this earth, guard the spaces wide and free. Do they find a piece of sky? Where can our children play? Fields of green and gold, let their laughter echo clear. In a world so tightly wound, where can our children play? Bring them fields of green and gold, let their laughter echo clear. In a world so tightly wound, where can our children play?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Laurie Gagan. I'm part of the Wellness Crusaders. Welcome back to our show. Today, we're diving into a fascinating and often overlooked area of health, the connection between inflammation, blood clotting, and immune response, what we know as inflammothrombotic immunological response. We're also exploring how detoxification at the cellular level, particularly through an advanced form of zeolite, can support cardiovascular health in our increasingly toxic world. Joining me today are two incredible guests, Dr. Richard M. Fleming, a distinguished nuclear cardiologist, a nuclear physicist, an MD, a PhD, and an attorney, with decades of research in inflammation and cardiovascular disease. I am also joined today by Dr. Nikolas Tsirikos-Karapanos, a cardiovascular surgeon, a PharmD, a PhD, and the innovator behind Clear Detox Pro, a patented water-soluble zeolite supplement designed to bind and remove heavy metals and other environmental toxins at the cellular level. So whether you're a healthcare practitioner, a biohacker, or someone just trying to stay ahead of the health curve, this episode will offer clinical insights with real-world takeaways. So let's go ahead and jump in. Good evening, Dr. Fleming and Dr. Tsirikos-Karapanos. I am honored to have both of you on the podcast today. But before we get started, what I would like to do is just have you spend a few minutes letting our audience know a little bit about you and some of the things that you're actually known for. So Dr. Tsirikos-Karapanos, I'll just start with you, and then we'll go on to Dr. Fleming.
Laurie, thank you very much for this kind invitation, especially being next to Dr. Fleming. Let me start, please, with this. Dr. Fleming is one of my idols. In the period of my cardiovascular surgery residency and fellowship. He is one of the world pioneers in very serious, innovative, and translational research in the coronary flow. And let me share with you, and I will share it for the first time in front of Dr. Fleming. I have read every single paper that Dr. Fleming authored in my preparation for my board certification in thoracic and cardiovascular surgery, and maybe more importantly, for my own education and development as a researcher. And I was based a lot of my research as it started at the University of Athens and then applied at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, on Dr. Fleming's findings in the coronary flow. So I'm extremely excited to be with you today. My background is RMD. I'm a fully trained board certified pharmacist, fully trained board certified medical doctor, fully trained board certified cardiovascular surgeon. I worked at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota for 5 years before forming my own company, Metron Nutraceuticals, in Cleveland, Ohio, where we are at the field of research and development and innovation in dietary supplements. We produce our own formulations based on our own intellectual property, consisting up to now to 16 patents. So with this, thank you very much again for this kind invitation, and great pleasure to be with you.
And Dr. Fleming, tell our audience a little bit about yourself.
Laurie, thank you. Dr. Nikolas, thank you very much. That was very kind of you. I'm delighted. If anything I've done has been a contribution for you and the people in the field. I'm a physicist, nuclear cardiologist, attorney. I have done roughly 51 years of research in physics, and then moved towards medicine, where I did the internal medicine, then cardiology, nuclear cardiology, antimatter, PET imaging, and then roughly 11 years ago, got my JD degree, my jurisprudence doctorate. In that amount of time, I've published extensively looking at what we were initially doing with American Heart, with lipids, trying to answer questions about why we were seeing heart disease, strokes, as people refer to it, which also plays into why we see high blood pressure, cancer, diabetes, obesity, miscarriages. It turns out that all of these are related. These chronic diseases that Bobby Kennedy is bringing people to their attention are really the result of our body responding to an imbalance occurring either due to too much of something or too little of something. And as you said, the name for the theory has changed over the years. I keep changing it. It's my theory, so I get to change it. My expectations of the medical and scientific community is different from the general public, but my expectations of the general public increases because I think that while the use of the terms that I sometimes apply sound like they are meant to be overly complicated, I also believe, having a father and a mother who had an 8th grade and a 12th grade education, and were two of the smartest people I ever met in my life, that the general public should not allow itself to be talked down to by us oversimplifying. I think that if we take the time to explain what the terms are, and you hear it, you'll begin to process it. And I think that people are a lot more capable than they're given credit for. And that's one of the reasons why I pushed this forward with using the terms. But I also remember that as I was taught as a medical student, that if we couldn't explain to our classmates who were younger what something meant when we used the medical terms, it meant we didn't understand the terms we were using. And that's one of the reasons why I'm very critical when people use abbreviations or acronyms and don't explain themselves, because more often than not, they really don't have that down. And the process of learning is a never-ending one. At 69, I have no plans of slowing down. I don't think Dr. Nikolas has plans of slowing down. We're not going to really have the impact in the world that we want to have by slowing down and just expecting somebody else to come along. So the inflammothrombotic immunologic response is our body's response to something. And when it's out of balance, it becomes a disease. So it's an inflammothrombotic immunologic response disease. And COVID is a classic example of that, but so is heart disease, CVAs, cerebrovascular accidents or strokes, high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity, cancer, miscarriages, the arthritides. These are all the end result of the body not being in balance, not being homeostatic, as we refer to it. And typically, when physicians or scientists get into trouble, it's when we try to perturb the system and push it one way, and the body responds to try to bring homeostasis back, and it overcompensates doing the other. So that, I would say, that's the theory. Obviously, a lot of work with that's gone into all these different diseases. The patent FMTVDM, which is the only available method, it's the only patented method, so therefore it's going to be the only patented method for some time until that patent expires, that can quantify or measure these metabolic and regional blood flow differences in the body. And those differences in metabolism and blood flow define our health and our state of disease. So I would argue that anything that we do to correct that balance, including, Dr. Nikolas' perspective of zeolite and his other products, if those products address those metabolic and blood flow issues, we should expect to be able to measure that with FMTVDM and demonstrate improvement. And that's really what we're going for, I think, in this era of MAHA. It's not just a warm, fuzzy feeling. It's actually making a difference in all these health problems that have occurred, finding these problems sooner, addressing them less toxically, less damaging to the body, and getting not only America, but humanity back to a better state of health.
Wow, that's a lot to digest. So, Dr. Fleming, let's kick things off. Can you offer our listeners a fresh perspective, even though you just talked about the inflammothrombotic immunological response, but offer our listeners a fresh perspective on how it specifically affects the heart and the circulatory system?
Right. Well, any of these different factors that play a role, whether it's cholesterol, fats, excess calories, homocysteine, infectious diseases. And I would argue that on the infectious diseases, you should not have to be a physicist or a rocket scientist, kind of the dumb physicist, to figure out that if you have a virus and you have a genetic vaccine and the vaccine encodes for the toxic or harmful part of the virus, then you're also potentially talking about genetic vaccines. That may or may not play a role to various extents. Interventions that occur, a lot of the different things that we talk about, diet and lifestyle, smoking, alcohol, all play a different role. When people look at this and they're looking for simple answers, a good way to think about this is to think of it like a spider's web. You can have all these different factors or variables as strings or part of the web, all right? And what may distort the web in one person may not distort the web in another person. There's multiple variables and multiple factors put in terms that my parents might have used, the straw that breaks the camel's back. What is it for any given individual? And it's typically not the same thing. One person can be exposed to the same trauma to the body that somebody else might be, but it only affects one person. Why? Because the health and the state of the individual is different. Other cofactors are different. And so what we do know is that there's a whole host of these variables that play a role together, some of which we can measure in blood tests. But the problem with measuring blood tests, just like the problem with just taking your weight, is that that is a far downstream effect. And what we're not waiting for is damage to be so big or so much of a problem that we're measuring it by weight or blood tests. It's really the tissue level where it's going to happen. And we know, for example, with myocardial infarctions, what people call heart attacks, where there's a final blood clot that forms in the artery of the heart, a coronary artery, that about 80 to 85% of all heart attacks occur in an artery that has a 30 or less percent diameter narrowing, because the inflammatory thrombotic immunologic response is in the wall of the artery, preventing the wall from being able to relax to increase its blood flow and that flow reserve of the heart. So you may not know you have a problem until, as I've said now a couple of decades ago, half of the people find out they have heart disease by dropping dead of heart attack. That's their first warning sign. And we need to get to a place, if we're serious for America and the world, that we ask ourselves very pointed questions. What are the problems that we are introducing to our bodies? People can, I've heard some, what I'm just going to refer to as mocking, red dye number, whatever. Okay, red dye number whatever is a component. It's a thing to recognize. Glyphosate being sprayed on our foods is a thing to recognize. I was in the grocery store, a couple days ago looking for tomatoes, and I didn't buy them because they had a 4 number at the very beginning, which means they've been sprayed with pesticides and herbicides, right? And 8 means it's GMO, and if it has a 9 at the beginning, it means it's actual real food that hasn't been altered in some way. Well, with a 4, I'm not going to cut that up and ingest that, because you can't scrub a tomato hard enough to get the toxins out of it. And that means it's going to go in you. And there's an old expression, eat to live, don't live to eat. And we need to remember that whatever we put in our bodies, food, liquid, air, medications, you name it, it's going into our bodies, and there's a consequence to that. And I've told people for decades, you don't treat something you put in your body by putting something else in your body. You treat it by not putting the first thing in your body. So we need to be very cognizant of, I really enjoyed your introduction, because that's the first time I've seen that, where it really addresses the health of the food and the lifestyles that we are living in.
Thank you for that. And so if I understand you correctly, Dr. Fleming, someone going in to have a CAT scan isn't going to show anything with heart disease.
So you may or may not see calcium. Here's the example for people to do. We have 2 basic types of tests. We have tests that look for anatomy or structure. This is like taking your teenager to the car lot for a car, and they look at the cars and they go, wow, that's a really great looking car. I like the structure of it, okay? but you have no idea how well that car runs. You want to do a test drive. You want to see how it works, how it performs. That's called physiology. And so we have the fields of anatomy and physiology. Most of the tests that we have are basic structures. Is there something big enough to be structurally seen? But that in and of itself is typically not the problem. Most cancers, for example, have been around for a while before they're big enough to be seen on a structure. And when you're looking at a structure, just a lung cancer, if you have a lung cancer on a chest x-ray or a CT, and it's 1 centimeter across, or 2.54 inches is 1 centimeter across, and you wait and you take another x-ray, say 6 months later, and it's now 1.25 centimeters across, that may not seem like much of a difference to you, but it means the size of the cancer has doubled. The volume has doubled. We don't want to wait till something is big enough to be seen. We want to find things when they're early, when we can do less toxic things to them. And we want to see the structure. And so even though you see this big mass, for example, for a cancer, on the very inside of that cancer, where the blood flow is really being deprived and the cells are dying, so calcium leaks out, which is why we see the calcium, you're not seeing that. You're just seeing this mass. What FMTVDM, or Fleming method for tissue and vascular differentiation metabolism, sometimes just shortened to Fleming method, does is it uses the functionality of the human body to give away these changes in blood flow and metabolism and then measure it. So it will see things that you can't see yet on a CT scan or an MRI or an X-ray or anything else. We want to know what the function of something is. And that's what tells you what you're really looking at. For example, if you have somebody driving a car and they're driving it intelligently and they suddenly speed up, what's the function? Why did they speed up? Well, it's a good thing, even though it might put people at risk, if the reason they sped up is because there's a woman in the back seat who's going into labor. That's a good thing. But all you see is a speeding up car. Now, let's imagine that somebody just got into the car and is carjacking it, and now they're speeding up. Is that the same thing as the pregnant woman delivering in the back seat of the car? It's not. All you see anatomically is a car speeding up. FMTVDM tells you, did it speed up because there's a pregnant lady in the car or a carjacking going on?
Thank you for that explanation. I've heard you explain that at several of the conferences that I've been with you. Next question, Dr. Nikolas. Oxidative stress and detox connection. Many people hear the term oxidative stress, but don't quite grasp its role. I think of it personally in terms of an apple that you've cut and then you set it on a counter and you come back an hour or so later and that apple is brown. Can you help our listeners understand how oxidative stress triggers the inflammothrombotic immunological response in cardiovascular health?
With pleasure, Laurie. First of all, you are right. It is like the apple that is exposed to oxygen, and then we have problems there. So let's start very simply. Oxidative stress is the stress that we have in a tissue or an organ because of oxidation. And this is something that happens every single day. We cannot stop it. Let me go back to what very wisely Dr. Fleming said. Everything is a matter of balance. Balance. Everything has to have metron. That's why we called our company metron. Metron is the concept of the internal balance of a system. We were designed to have balance as human beings. We call it homeostasis. That means that whenever we have a problem, our body has the systems in order to fight against this problem. So oxidative stress is something that is happening normally, but we have the systems in place in our body to fight against this oxidative stress. How this happens, how this problem happens? Well, we have what we call radical oxygen species or reactive oxygen species, and these are the bad guys. Now, we have the mechanisms, we have the enzymes, we have the enzymic reactions, the biochemical reactions to overcome this problem. Again, at the health status, there is a balance. The problem occurs, we solve the problem. Our real problem happens when we cannot fight the oxidative stress that will occur. We lose the balance. So then the internal balance of our system is damaged. We can define this as disease or as expression of symptoms that are categorized as diseases. Now, why oxidative stress is so important? Well, it is so important because it applies to every single tissue of our body. This is not something for the central nervous system, or just the cardiovascular system, or just the gastrointestinal system. This applies to every single system of our body, every single organ of our body. Now, there are natural substances that we are using, we take them from our food, to fight against this stress that is caused by oxidation, the oxidative stress. Antioxidants. Many food substances are natural antioxidants, and we can use them to fight back. This is for the healthy metabolism. So our metabolism works, we are able to fight this back, homeostasis works, we keep balance, we are okay. Let's see what can happen so then we have problems. Well, there are many reasons for this. Number one, environmental factors, what we call pollution, okay? Smoking, radiation, exposure to many kinds of toxins. Speaking chemically, inorganic toxins like heavy metals, organic toxins like herbicides, pesticides, and also composite toxins like the particulate matter. Specifically, the particulate matter, 2.5 tiny particulate matter, like dust, is a big time problem because it sits in our cells and it triggers oxidation. So these are, pollutants that cause problems that we should be able to fight against unless something goes wrong. Now, what can go wrong? Well, first of all, our food. Dr. Fleming, I will use the famous quote that the great grandfather of all of us, the great Dr. Hippocrates, 25 centuries said very wisely, let the food be the medicine and let the medicine become the food. Well, when Hippocrates said this, again 25 centuries ago, people didn't use to soak their food on glyphosate. People didn't use to spray their foods with herbicides and pesticides. And Laurie, all these substances, chemical substances, are designed by pharmaceutical companies to have a high level of water solubility, because having high level of water solubility can be absorbed by the roots of the plants. Well, guess what else is happening with this high water solubility? These substances get into our body by the food that we eat, the air that we breathe, and the water that we drink. Let's stop for a moment here. Food that we eat, water that we drink, air that we breathe. How we can stop these substances by getting in our body? Answer, we cannot. We cannot stop drinking water. We cannot stop eating food. We cannot stop breathing. And again, there are several marketing approaches out there saying, well, I only eat organic. Good. And, organic is fine. But, the last time that we checked the global map, it was impossible to identify where exactly this organic land is, that I assume they have organic water there. They have organic air. So this strawberry grew up by having organic water. Nice marketing approach, does not apply to reality. So the problem is that our natural defense that could be helped by the food cannot, because we manage to start destroying our food. And then we have repercussions. Now, there's another problem here. We don't have repercussions only from one organ or only from one system. Let me explain why is this important. Let's give a simple example. You walk, you sleep, you fail, you have a broken leg. Okay, that's a problem of this bone. You're going to fix that. You're going to do surgery or put a cast, or do something. You're going to solve this problem. It's a single dimension problem. The problem with environmental toxicity and its repercussion in our inability to fight with the oxidative stress relies in something which is very, very important. Our actions, our homeostatic mechanisms to defend ourselves are chemical reactions in our body, everywhere in our body, in our cells. The problem is that heavy metals and other environmental toxins, organic and inorganic molecules, are a factor or a cofactor, certainly a common denominator for many wellness problems and many health problems, because heavy metals and environmental toxins interfere with many biochemical pathways in our body, and they influence these biochemical pathways, making them to malfunction or go slow. So it's a very complex issue here. That's why you see people that they have hypertension and digestive problems and this and that and the other thing. How is it possible to have 10 conditions at the same time? Well, because you get in your body toxins that interfere with all the systems that malfunction and create these conditions for your wellness, and after a certain point for your health, and sometimes can become lethal.
That's a great explanation. Thank you for that. Dr. Tsirikos, and I'm so used to calling you Dr. Nikolas. Dr. Tsirikos, your innovative work in coronary artery flow at Mayo Clinic resulted in 2 prestigious awards, the Grillo Award and the Robert Emery Award. Can you tell our listeners about the inspiration behind this work?
Oh, thank you, Laurie. Well, my work is based is a quantitative coronary artery flow analysis model, and my work was based partially on the work of Dr. Fleming, who is the first one who expressed the need to have something more functional in the coronary flow. Before Dr. Fleming's work in the world of cardiac surgery, we had the coronary angiography, which is the one that you inject the dye in the coronary arteries and you have the moving shadows. And then it was insufficient sometimes to evaluate appropriately the patient and see how many bypass grafts we need to have in this bypass operation. And then Dr. Fleming is coming and saying, no, we need something that will allow us to see the functionality. So he introduced the fractional flow reserve. Is not what you see in a moving shadow of the coronary angiography, but by applying the fractional flow reserve, as introduced by Dr. Fleming, we could say, yes, we have a problem here, or we don't have a problem here. And again, this happened when I was in my early years, late years of medical school and immediately before my residency. And then I said, okay, all right, so what exactly, how can we exactly find what is the normal coronary flow? We're in the operating room, okay, we perform a bypass operation. We have the technology to measure the flow of the graft, and we say that will be the left internal mammary artery to the LED, and we have 40 ml of flow. Okay, what does that mean? First, we have flow. Okay, all right, our anastomosis is good. Second, we have 40 ml, not minus 40. That means we have flow to the heart, not from the heart. Okay, that's good too. What the number 40 means? Dr. Fleming is smiling because he knows exactly where I go. The question in my mind was like, what was the coronary flow in this coronary artery, in this human being, before he became a patient? And then I said, why don't I know this? What have I missed? Well, I've missed nothing because the information is not in the physiology books, believe it or not. So then, Laurie, I would use something also from the automotive industry that I'm fan. Let's suppose that you have your car, new car, everything is fine. You drive the car, you press the gas pedal, the car does not accelerate. Oh no, we have a problem now. You get the car to the dealership. You say, look, I press the gas pedal, does not accelerate. The dealership is good and say, don't worry, we'll fix it. Here's the mechanic. Takes the keys and tells, don't worry, come in 2 hours, we're gonna be fine. Okay, you are happy now. And as you step out of the dealership, you turn and say, oh, by the way, what is the output of my engine in horsepower? How would you feel if the mechanic would say, oh, we don't know that? Believe it or not, that was exactly the case with the coronary artery flow before the innovative pioneering work of Dr. Fleming and before the work of many researchers all over the world, including the work that we did at Mayo Clinic. So this was the inspiration. And we did some good work. We showed for the first time that if you have ischemia, if you induce ischemia in one lung, then the coronary artery flow drops down. We proved that for the first time in the world. And actually, we connected this when we found the correlation between the coronary artery flow and the cytokine interleukin 6 and with cardiac troponin. This gives us the prestigious Grillo Award. Then, so we described two mechanisms at Mayo Clinic. We described the mechanism of how, and we explained how problems in the coronary arteries in the heart occur when we have ischemia outside of the heart. Okay? And the second mechanism we described is once you solve the problem of ischemia in the lung and you reestablish the flow of the blood to the lung, why coronary artery flow becomes worse initially. And we described the mechanism of the ischemia-induced reperfusion trauma. It was exciting. We were very happy that we could give some answers to some serious questions that surgeons face intraoperatively. The Robert Emery Award came after that because we were able to show for the first time that you can implant in the heart, in the left ventricular apex, you can implant on a beating heart an apical aortic valve to treat serious or severe aortic stenosis on a beating heart without compromising the coronary flow. This was a first. Unfortunately, we never thought to call, the Guinness Book of Record there to record that for the first time we measured 8 arterial flows. Nobody had done it before. We were the first that we did this at Mayo Clinic. Exciting times. I still feel, as Dr. Fleming said, I'm a little younger. I'm 58. But I think we share the same thing with Dr. Fleming. I think we both feel that we have just warmed the engine here.
Oh, I love it. Oh my gosh. Both of you, it's just so amazing what the two of you have been able to do for science. So Dr. Fleming, on to you for the next question. Genetics. So genetics is always a hot topic, especially with lipoprotein a, which so many doctors don't even look at. Are there specific genetic predispositions that make someone more vulnerable to an exaggerated inflammothrombotic immunological response? And how might someone find out if they are at higher risk?
So there are a lot of variables that play in genetically for a number of diseases, including lipoprotein a. Whether you have to have those genetics or not, we don't know exactly what percentage of people are going to be impacted by that, because again, as I would, with that example I gave earlier, it's one of the webs in the spider web to determine whether it's really having an effect. But lipoprotein a certainly was underplayed for many decades. It was part of what I introduced in 1994 with the original theory, with an understanding that it's basically related to low density lipoproteins, and those tend to have better data on genetics. Although every time I hear a genetics question, I always have a little pause in it, because there's this expectation that people are going to say, see, it's not what I'm doing, it's my bad genes, and I'm going to blame my parents for it. When we get to something that is so critical that it determines whether the species will survive, and diet and nutrition and the lipids and all of these factors that play a role, well, most of them, because some of them are caused by human intervention. So clearly that's not something that we would expect to be played out genetically. All of these variables are going to have more than one genetic foci addressing the problem. And the best way to explain that is, when we launch a spaceship, when we launch any rocket, we don't do it with just one system. We tend to have the system running it and 2 backups. Why? Because we expect a failure. And if there's a failure, the only way that you keep a rocket from blowing up, for example, just using that simple approach, is to have backup systems. You know, when the space shuttle first was trying to be launched, we watched the rocket power up and power down and power up and power down, and the general public had no idea what was going on. And what had happened was the mainframe computers at Capcom in Houston filled up that entire room below the visual where you see the spacecraft trajectory. And those were IBM computers that were purchased in the 1960s when nobody thought computers would advance. But by the time the space shuttle was launched, they had laptops that could be inserted into the shuttle, and they would run the shuttle. And what we saw was the shuttle was saying launch, and the mainframe was saying shut down. And they argued back and forth, so you'd see it powering up and powering down. Actually, what NASA did, that launched the first space shuttle, was they disconnected the onboard laptops that were trying to protect the shuttle and launched it. And fortunately, it didn't blow up. That story serves to say you need backup systems for something critical for survival. When we eat, what we eat, and how it plays a role in this inflammothrombotic immunologic response has multiple backup systems. So failure in one genetic sequence is not going to kill the individual. Most of the time when babies die in utero, it's because of a genetic defect that was so defective that there was no backup system to protect, and the baby died. To keep humanity alive, we have to have so many backup systems that are critical for these homeostatic processes, this inflammothrombotic immunologic response, and what we eat, that if there's a failure in one, going back to your question, the lipoprotein little a, it's not detrimental to you because you have other systems that will work and keep you out of trouble until you insult the system so much by overwhelming it, as Dr. Nikolas mentioned, because you now overwhelm the homeostatic process that's supposed to protect you. And that's typically what we do. We overwhelm. This species is so good at taking a system that has kept us alive for whatever number of years you want to have. Okay, my number is probably longer than your number, but and staying away from theologic conversations, it's designed to keep us alive so that when you have a genetic fault, you really can't blame your parents, because the reality is most of us have the bad genes that people want to talk about. And 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, those bad genes kept us alive. And today, with our processing of foods, our caloric condensation of foods, the inactive lifestyles we have, those now catch up to us. We're no longer running from the beasts on the Serengeti. We're now living in a different type of culture where these potential genes can be detrimental to us if we're not watching. And for example, when you take the Japanese population and you go back 3 to 4 generations, you will see that the height of Japanese citizens on the islands of Japan is much shorter than their grandchildren and great-grandchildren today brought into the Western culture. In fact, we track that very closely when they were Japan to the Hawaiian Islands and then to mainland. And there wasn't a genetic shift that occurred in 1 to 2 generations. That takes thousands of years to occur. In 2 generations, the typical Japanese descendant grew in height, grew in weight, and amazingly enough, grew in heart disease and diabetes and cancer, all related to the only change that we can track is the diet and lifestyle that occurred in the children and grandchildren as they left an Asian Oriental culture to a more Western civilized, deadly civilized culture that we now live in. So where lipoprotein little a genetics plays a role, I'm not going to give anybody an out by saying, oh, it's because of the bad genes you got, because we're all basically living with that same cluster of genes that was designed under austere circumstances to keep us alive. Now we have to deal with the genes that have kept our species alive, and we either have to demonstrate that we are intelligent enough to deserve to continue to live as a species by recognizing the problems and regulating it. This sounds very much like a parent talking to their child, right? But this is really where we are. Humanity now is kind of the child that wants to do whatever it wants to do. And, science hopefully is the parent trying to say, and I know science has taken a beating over the past few years, and I have maintained, I think Dr. Nikolas has maintained the quality of science as science is supposed to be. We didn't all cease to exist. The fact that other people are using the term science and not applying the same ethics and boundaries and consideration doesn't mean science has run amok. It means people in the field have run amok, but that is true of everything, whether it's science or farming or politics or law or any of the other fields that we get into. But now science, as the adult, needs to look at the children and say, these are the things, if you want to live a long, healthy lifestyle, it's possible, even with all the garbage we have in our food and our water and our air. It doesn't mean that we should just say, well, to heck with it, let's just keep polluting our water and air and food. No, it means we need to take responsibility for that too. But in reality, this is 2025, and in 2026, planet Earth is not going to become this clean, pristine place that it was 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. We will have to live with the ramifications of the damage that we've done. There is a consequence to us not caring, not being the stewards of this planet that we have the responsibility to be. We're going to have to step up and take accountability for that, or we will suffer the consequences. And we have seen the consequences in the last few years of humanity electing not to take responsibility. 10letters.org, not to beat that into the ground, is the recognition of the responsibility of taking responsibility for what we've done on this planet that we shouldn't have done. When we make biological weapons, there's a consequence. When we imitate that and put those gene sequences into something else and inject into people, there's a consequence. We have to live with this consequence, or we'll die with the consequence. We can either all hang separately or hang together, but I prefer the hanging together in the sense of sticking together, as opposed to what Hitler did at the end of World War II, when he said, well, if the soldiers are running, hang them, and that'll stop people from running. So it's time we quit hanging ourselves as a society, and it's time we look at the problems and become serious about it. And nobody said this is going to be easy. Nobody said we're going to wave a magic wand and in 1 or 2 years, our skies are going to be clean, our water is going to be purified, but we don't have to keep polluting it. We can work on cleaning it up, and we can work on what we put in our bodies. And, I don't want to be in the position of micromanaging people and what they eat and drink any more than I want to micromanage the people that work under me. I want to think that if I have my meetings, or in this case, if we tell society what they should and shouldn't be doing, that I don't then need to micromanage people. But we're now to a stage when we start to have these discussions that we can no longer accept the excuses of, well, it's just my genes and it's not my fault and all the food is garbage and, well, I like to drink. It's the only way I deal with stress, or I'm going to smoke my cigarettes because it's the only way I deal with stress. Well, there's more than one way to deal with stress. And some of that stress, as Dr. Nikolas pointed out, was oxidative reduction, right? That's real chemical stress, which has to do with which way the electrons are flowing in a pathway. But how we respond to that, how we mentally respond to that, how we physically respond to that, and how we respond to each other is going to play a major role in the type of health and well-being of humanity. And I would really like to encourage everybody to work on this together, because the sooner everybody else works on it with us, the longer life I expect to have. And I don't think at 69, I should be looking at 10 years or 3 years. I should be able to look at doubling my lifespan from where I'm at right now. Because I think, again, I don't know what Dr. Nikolas does for athletics or the rest of it, but I go running every day. I do some weightlifting every day. I like to play baseball every day with my youngest son. There is no reason why we shouldn't all be doing this. There is every expectation that I have that, today in 2025, we should be able to have these conversations. I would say that the rationale of FMTBDM is to figure out where your health is or where your disease is, and then allow you to work on it with something less toxic. And I'm a firm believer that anything that we put into our body that is for a treatment other than food and water should be something that we look at to bridge the gap between the problem we have and improving our quality of life so that we don't need to keep adding those things in. You don't put in your mouth something else to treat what you first put in your mouth. You don't put the first garbage in your mouth. And to the extent that we can control that, and we can make improvements on it, we should do that. And so hopefully that answered that question, Laurie.
That did. Thank you. Thank you so much. So, Dr. Tsirikos, I often hear you talking about chronic inflammation and systemic inflammation. And it's when one passes over the cellular membrane. It's where it does the most harm to the immune system. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about that so that they can understand?
I will. Permit me, Laurie. Well, it's enjoy listening to Dr. Fleming. We could have this, for many hours running. Couple of comments. Genes. If your genes are that bad, that can be lethal to you, trust me, you will not blame your parents because you will die in utero or you will die a little later. So stop blaming genes. Genes are where they are, but there are other things that we can do, to upregulate, downregulate proteins that are made by these genes so we can do something. Comment 1, comment 2. Unfortunately, when ethics are outside of the room where science is produced or of the room of the science is broadcasted, the outcome is not science, is pseudoscience. And these people who do that are not real scientists. These people are scammers. Third, we are all together in this. If we learn something with this pandemic is that the health of our neighbor is very important, not only to our neighbor. The health of our neighbor is very important also to us. So, there are not things that we can do to squeeze ourselves somewhere in the safe zone and everything is going to be okay for us. Let the others die. Yeah, this does not apply. Okay, with these comments, it's very important to understand that all the biochemical reactions are happening in our cells. Okay, and in our cells, we have the engine of the cells, which is the mitochondria. Laurie, mitochondria used to be independent organisms. And these organisms, at one point, could not survive. So at this point, there was a synergy between other small organisms, single cell organisms, that they wanted more energy. And they said, why don't we cooperate? Laurie, we have our own DNA. Our mitochondria have their own DNA, the mitochondrial DNA. And when something goes wrong there, we have the mitochondrial diseases and so on. But the whole battle is with the cell. I said many years ago when someone copied and started saying this, you can't be well if you don't fix the cell. Cannot. Or you can, put a Band-Aid in your wellness and health. Yeah, things are not going to be okay. And the whole battle is at the cellular level. And this is the reason that we created our formulations to be water soluble. And we designed them in such a way to be able to cross cellular membranes, to be absorbed in the gut, to have a systemic action. And not only our formulations, our detox formulations are acting at the cellular level, but they are acting at the subcellular level in the mitochondrium, where the whole battle, this is the battlefield for wellness. But it is extremely important to understand that you can put a makeup, you can make your hair. This is not fixing your cells. You need to be able to help the homeostatic mechanisms of your body to maintain homeostasis at the cellular level. One more comment. Laurie, let me simplify something that Dr. Fleming said. I think I explained what Dr. Fleming did with the fractional flow reserve, gave us the tool and the methodology. I mean, as the cardiologists and cardiac surgeons, to understand what is the actual need for this patient this moment. That's in the field of cardiology and interventional cardiology and cardiac surgery. What Dr. Fleming is doing right now, he's doing this functional analysis, not a static thing. Let me see one value of one parameter. But his model is doing this, his methodology is doing this at the holistic level, at the human body level. That's unique. I hope that our colleagues, cardiologists, medical doctors, and practitioners in the whole spectrum of healthcare and wellness start thinking this way, because we have a holistic problem to solve. Our wellness. It's not one tissue. It's not one system. It's not one organ. Everything is interrelated. So that's where we are heading. I think Dr. Fleming is paving the road for serious research and application of the findings of this research for the medicine and the wellness as it will be applied for the next 50, 100 years.
I like that. Thank you very much. Dr. Tsirikos, you've been at the forefront of detox science for well over a decade. Tell me a little bit about the water-soluble clinoptilolite zeolite that you invented, and how does that work at the cellular level?
Right. With pleasure. Let's make one correction though. I didn't invent it. If you invent something that does not exist, you make it. We discovered it. We found how to extract it. Let me explain. Zeolites are crystals made when volcano lava goes into seawater. All right. So zeolites are made millions of years ago. Now zeolites can attract and retain heavy metals and other organic toxins. All right. So far, easy. Toxins get in our body. Let's give a zeolite to attract these toxins. Well, it's not exactly like that, because these toxins, as said before, have high level of water solubility, are absorbed in the gut, circulate, and distributed in several compartments. We give the zeolite to do it by mouth. Well, unfortunately, zeolites are not water soluble, so they cannot cross cellular membranes, so they will stay only in the gut, and after a couple of bowel movements, they are out of the human body. So here is the paradox. What we give in order to take toxins out of the human body cannot do it, because cannot be absorbed. Moreover, and that's the second problem of zeolite powders, as we find in nature, is that they are full of free heavy metals. And these free heavy metals, not bound heavy metals, can be absorbed in the gut. So here was the problem. Zeolites cannot be absorbed, cannot offer systemic action, but the garbage that these zeolites are carrying, the elemental impurities, the free heavy metals, are absorbed. So when I was first involved with this, I said, wait a second here. So we are taking a zeolite to detox, but actually this zeolite is our daily toxic dose. is there any chance that we can transform this non-water soluble zeolite powder into a water solution of water-soluble zeolite powder? So I discovered nothing. I invented nothing, but I just applied, the appropriate methodology of hydrolysis to make the zeolite water soluble and to make it able to cross cellular membranes. So we didn't create something in a laboratory that does not exist. We took a natural ingredient and we applied a natural method of hydrolysis to make it water soluble. Let me give you an example, because these words, hydrolysis, clinoptilolite, a lot of scientific terminology here. Imagine an apple in the apple tree. Okay, is the apple natural product? It is. You take the apple out of the tree. Is the apple still natural product? It is. Now you cut the apple into pieces and you eat these little pieces of the apple. Are these little pieces of the apple, these little, fragments of the apple, natural products? Yes, they are. But now you can eat them in an easier way. That's, in an analogy, what we did with zeolites. It was difficult to do it. We did it. We got 16 patents for this, and we are based on formulation on our own intellectual property, and we have the know-how to do it.
Thank you for that that answer. As a follow-up to that, before I get back to Dr. Fleming for a final question, what is Clear Detox Pro able to detox? We know heavy metals, but what are some of the other examples of what it works on?
Everything that a zeolite can detox from, Clear Detox Pro can do it, but also can do it at a systemic level. There is literature related to zeolites and what they can detox from, which is inorganic compounds like heavy metals, and also organic molecules like herbicides, pesticides, mycotoxins, cellular fragments. So there is a very wide spectrum of inorganic and organic molecules that can be removed or captured and removed out of the body by zeolites. The difference between Clear Detox Pro and other zeolites, the differences are two. Number one, it has a systemic action. It does this systemically because it can cross cellular membranes. And Laurie, the pioneering work that we have done in order to support this claim. No other product in the spectrum of dietary supplements has done this. And the second advantage is that the water-soluble zeolite within Clear Detox Pro is purified, because with our patented technology, we were able to remove from this zeolite the free heavy metals. So Clear Detox Pro is a safe and effective systemic detoxifier.
Wow, fascinating. Thank you for that. Dr. Fleming, last question back to you. What inspired you to write your book, Stop Inflammation Now?
Well, before I answer that, I'm going to address Dr. Nikolas a little bit and give an example for people to understand. When Sir Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin, it was the result of Petri plates in Scotland being left out and not being cleaned, and his observation that the fungi inhibited the bacterial growth. In the early stages and use of that, a lot of people made penicillium, or penicillin as a lot of people refer to it, with a lot of contaminants, a lot of protein contaminants. And so a lot of people who received penicillin were told that they were allergic to penicillin, when in fact they weren't. They were allergic to the protein contaminants that were already in the compounds that were being done. Over the course of time, some people decided to purify and to come up with a much better product. And that is one of the reasons why very few people have allergies to penicillin. The ones that tend to, that are older, it's because their bodies saw the antigens, the items that, the proteins that produced allergies, with the penicillin and the other proteins originally, and then even with the purified penicillin, their bodies still said, well, that was connected with this other protein that I was allergic to, so they have allergies. But today, few people are allergic to penicillin because it's purified. It's been cleaned up. And I want to use that as an example because Dr. Nikolas had pointed out their efforts to purify their product and the importance of that. And if you don't think the purification of a product is important, I want to just ask you to keep your ears open, because there's a research paper out of Slovakia and the Czech Republic that they and I have done on the genetic vaccines of Pfizer and Moderna, where we're going to talk about the difference between purified compounds and non-purified compounds. And you're going to see just how potentially lethal it is to have the non-purified compounds. So this goes to Dr. Nikolas's efforts to make sure that what he's doing, he gets down to the fundamental process of his product, so he knows what he's working with, and there's not a question about something else. Now, your question to me was, why did I decide to write a book on the Stop Inflammation Now book?
It's my favorite book.
I'll throw the other 27 out there. The answer was very simple. You know, I joined American Heart in 1976 as the youngest faculty member. And my efforts at that time initially had to do with lipids and rewriting the lipid numbers. Dr. John Farquhar, who was one of the 12 of us who's passed away, a good friend and colleague, he was the man who talked about metabolic syndrome first, not the people today that are trying to take credit for it. And one of my thresholds for giving people credibility or not credibility is whether they quote or note sources, the original people who did something. And Farquhar, you know, he was the one who put that together. I mean, there were 11 of us on the committee with him. He put those numbers together and made so the people that want to take credit for his work today, they get no ethics problem as far as I'm concerned in science and medicine. And if you demonstrate that you're unethical, that's probably you. But it was very clear by the time I was working through the 70s and 80s that I was not getting to the bottom of the answer of what was causing heart disease. I mean, it was very clear. And when I originally did the theory and laid it out in 1994, and it got published, presented in American Heart in 94, again in 95, then published in a textbook in 99, and we did the 2020 episode in 2004. One of the things that I laid out in the textbook chapter and the Stop Inflammation Now were hundreds of research papers that other people did. I didn't do them. They did the work. They did the work on homocysteine. They did the work on lipoprotein low 80. They did the work on fibrinogen. They did, you know, it was taking the collective and bringing it together to develop that image back there on the wall to put the pieces together. So by 1994, it was clear to me I had to present at American Heart, where I was faculty, and this was not warmly received at the time, the nuances of not just looking at lipids, but at looking at other variables. And that meant that I started by just looking at cardiology literature in the US, then internal medicine literature in the US, then nutrition literature in the US. And then I expanded out. I said, well, you know, maybe we don't have it all. And looked at Europe and Asia. And by the time I did all that, it was very clear that there were pieces that nobody had put together, and there's, as I've said multiple times, I've only shared about 2/3 of what I know with people. Interleukin-6 was one of the pieces that I had not shared until recently, and I know not Dr. Nikolas had mentioned that. But we had that data back in the early to mid 90s. Again, trying to put the pieces together. I don't come forward. I'm not going to redo that thing again. So by 94, I was trying to explain to medical colleagues, and 95 and all those. By 2004, I had people that had asked me to please try to put something together, not only for the medical community, but for the general. Trust me when I say the last thing I wanted to do was to, because when I write research papers, and none of my papers that I've ever submitted have I ever thought this is good to go. Every one of them has been, I could work on this for another decade and I would still not be happy with it, but it's movement forward, and 500 papers later, I still feel that way with everything I write, which is I will never write anything that I'm completely happy with, but I'm going to write it to the extent that I think it's ready to at least start people talking, right? So the purpose of writing that book is the same purpose as of anything, which is to look at my audience. And, I've told you this numerous times. When somebody says, hi, I am so-and-so, and it's usually I'm Dr. So-and-so, my first response is, okay, a doctor of what? Because if you're a doctor of education, I'm not going to talk to you like a physicist or anybody else. My focus is to know my audience, who I'm speaking to, what examples I can use, how I'm going to get the idea across, if I can get the idea across. And that I typically think of that last one as my problem, not my audience's problem, because if I can't get it across to you, I need to sit down and figure out what it is that hits your gray matter, your brain, that I can reach, that I can use as an example. So when people came to me and said, would I write a book for the general public, I sat down and I wrote that, and it's probably the most interesting. I'd already written a couple books, How to Bypass Your Bypass, The Diet Myth, and then this one. And this one was different because this one, I had an agent that went to the publishers, and I got this very excited phone call from him one day. And he says, yeah, I've sent it off to a couple publishers, and they're really excited about this. And I'd only sent the proposal, with a brief outline. And he said, but don't get excited, because they say this for a lot of things. And the next day he calls me up and he says, I got to call back. She read it and she couldn't put it down all night, and was like, my brain said, well, great. I don't know what you want me to do with that. But we set up a meeting to go to meet several publishers. And the Wednesday before that meeting, I got a call from somebody who was involved in helping to write it. And he said, could we cancel the meeting? His son had just been in a motorcycle accident. I said, oh, Tom, listen, seriously. How's your son? Number one, how's your son? The very important thing. Well, he was in critical condition. He was in the intensive care unit. It's like, Tom, don't worry about it. I'll cancel the meetings. Don't worry. And Thursday, I called him up. I said, how's your son? He says, still in intensive care. I said, okay. So we had a little conversation. Called him on Friday, or he called me on Friday, and he said, let's go ahead and do that meeting. Let's do the meeting. We can do it next week. The doctors tell me they're going to transfer my son out of the intensive care unit tomorrow, Saturday. I said, well, Tom, here's the deal. People get transferred out of intensive care units on the weekend, Friday, Saturday, for two reasons. Either they're doing better or they need beds. And they're hedging the bet that you'll do okay. I said, don't worry about it. I've already canceled the meeting. Don't worry. We'll reschedule if it's supposed to happen. So Monday comes and he says, we can do it. He's supposed to home Wednesday. And I said, Tom, that's great. Get your son home. When he's home, doing better, then we'll talk. The next morning, Tuesday morning, I walked in and my chief nuclear technologist says, Dr. Fleming, you got to see this. So I walked in. He says he was showing the Today Show. And he said, do you know where you're supposed to be today for that meeting? And I said, yeah, right there. That was 9/11. And our meeting was in South Tower. So that book, we were supposed to meet in South Tower for that meeting. And that's one of I probably should have been there. I've always felt I should be there because as a physician, had I been there, I hopefully could have helped some people. But that book was not only written for the general public, but that book represents something of a reminder of 9/11 to me. That's very close. The President of the United States was brought to where I was at later that day. So it's close for that reason. And then when 2020 actually aired the segment, they came in advance and recorded it. And Barbara Walters had left 2020 and she wanted to come back and be a part of that program. So Barbara Walters' return on 2020 was the day that program on that book, Unstop Inflammation Now, was aired because Barbara Walters wanted to be there at the time to be part of that. So that is probably a little bit more encompassing story than you were going for. But it has meaning to me because of all the people that were involved and the experience that we were going through. And for a brief moment, when Americans could pull themselves out of self-centeredness and look at other people around them. And for a brief moment, while the rest of the world saw the United States as standing together, much as Dr. Nikolas made a comment that the health of our neighbors is important to us, what happens with the rest of Americans is important to us. This is not a matter of them versus us. This is a matter of all of us, humanity, Americans, other countries, looking at everybody around us and saying, if I'm true to this idea of trying to make this a better world, I am only going to do this if, in fact, I truly want to make the world better, which means I have to step outside of myself long enough to make a difference. And so the accolades I think that Dr. Nikolas has had and those that I have received, at least speaking for myself, and I'm pretty certain for him right now, these aren't for me. These aren't accolades about me. These are accolades about doing something for humanity to make this a better world, to make our quality of life better and the lives of our children and our grandchildren. And in doing that, what is it? The scene out of Gladiator, what we do today will echo in eternity. What we do, how we respond to all this, how we treat other people, why we're doing what we're doing speaks volumes about who we are. And I think if humanity takes the position of doing for humanity to make all of us better and healthier, the message that will echo through eternity will be that. And if we do the opposite, it'll be that other devastating, non-desirable. And I would like to think that the reason for being here, for doing this, is a better humanity for all of us.
Thank you for that. Dr. Tsirikos, any final comments on that?
Only one. Dr. Fleming is spot on. We are at we. We are not at me or you or my little, place of safety. We need collectively to work in such a way to stop removing ethos from science, telling the truth, the whole truth, keep investigating, keep looking deep inside ourselves and expressing our needs and our questions for the surrounding of us in such a way that it is productive not only for us, but for everybody. I think we are on the same page with Dr. Fleming, and I believe that there is a global movement, Laurie and Dr. Fleming, of classing Western medicine, science trained people like us. And if we start counting today, we have two medical doctors, we have a physicist, a pharmacist, a cardiologist, a nuclear cardiologist, a cardiac surgeon, 2 inventors, 2 PhD holders. Am I saying it right? So we have 11 people here and an amazing organizer who makes this possible to go to people out there, which is you, Laurie. So what our audience is experiencing today, it has a collective, added value, I believe more than 100 years for this 1 hour and 24 minutes so far. So we are at we. And as Dr. Fleming said, in his 69 young and my 58 young, we have just warmed the engine, and we can assure, and I speak for both of us now, we can assure you that we are here to stay, and better days are ahead of us.
I love that. I love that. So thank you both, Dr. Fleming and Dr. Tsirikos-Karapanos, for this fascinating conversation. You've helped bridge the gap between clinical insight and practical everyday health strategies. I pray that God watches over both you and your families. And I'm very honored to have had this podcast today with you. So thank you and good night.
Good night. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
both of you.
Likewise.
Bring them fields of green and gold, let their laughter echo clear. In a world so tightly wound, where can our children play? Bring them fields of green and gold, let their laughter echo clear. In a world so tightly wound, where can our children play?